You're listening to the Station 71 podcast with your hosts, Mario,
Beth,
and Brian.
So this week we decided it would be a good time to play a fun little round of best and worst. We have 3 categories, but we'll go over them in a couple minutes. As always, let's start with the news. I'm going to turn it over to Beth this week since I was a little underprepared.
Cool. So I guess let's start with the one I think that has the least impact, at least to me personally. I don't know about you guys, but it was announced that Night of Joy will not be returning to Walt Disney World in 2018 or beyond. A spokeswoman for Disney said that last year's was, quote, the last one. So last year apparently was the 35th year that Night of Joy had been going on. It used to be at Magic Kingdom, but then they moved it to Wide World of Sports in 2016. So they haven't actually offered a reason as to why they are closing it, but my speculation is that it's not making enough money or it wasn't worth the time and effort. I don't know about you guys.
I've always liked the idea of Night of Joy. It's always been really cool to see that this is something that they do in the parks, but one, it's just not super advertised. They don't plug it as much as they do the other holiday stuff. And at the same time, it's, I don't know, something about this just feels like it doesn't appeal to the average Disney goer.
Yeah, and I have never been to a Night of Joy, so I can't speak from personal experience, but I heard it was kind of raunchy. A bunch of, teenagers running around unsupervised kind of way.
Oh, wow.
I mean, what can go wrong there?
Right. But anyway, so moving on, Disney has decided to offer one-day, one-park tickets, which include pre-made FastPass selections. So the ones that are going to be offered, they have cute little catchy names. The ones at Magic Kingdom, Fantasyland Classics will be It's a Small World, Dumbo, and Mad Tea Party. So, Kirsten, that one's for you, obviously.
Wow, that's actually crazy that one hits all 3 of her.
Right.
Yeah.
Futuristic and Frightful Fun will include Buzz Lightyear Space Ranger Spin, Haunted Mansion, and Tomorrowland Speedway. Pint-sized adventures will be Barnstormer, Magic Carpets of Aladdin, and Pirates of the Caribbean. And whimsical escapades will be Under the Sea Journey of the Little Mermaid, Mini Adventures of Winnie the Pooh, and Monsters, Inc. Laugh Floor. Do you guys want to talk about these, or do you want me to read the whole list first?
Go through the whole list. You might as well.
Okay. So at Epcot, immersive explorations will be Spaceship Earth, Living with the Land, and the Seas with Nemo and Friends. And delightful encounters will be The Seas with Nemo and Friends, Turtle Talk with Crush, and Journey into Imagination with Figment. Hollywood Studios will have sensational stage shows, including Beauty and the Beast, Frozen Sing-Along, and Voyage of the Little Mermaid, and then movie-inspired entertainment, Muppet Vision 3D, Star Tours, and the Indiana Jones Stunt Spectacular. And then finally, at Animal Kingdom, first option is Prehistoric and Whitewater Thrills, consisting of Dinosaur, Cali River Rapids, and Primeval Whirl. And wild performances will include fast passes for Festival of the Lion King, Finding Nemo the Musical, and It's Tough to Be a Bug. And just as a side note, these do count as your regular fast pass attraction selections. So it's not like you get these in addition. They replace them, and you have to use these 3 before you can select any more like you would with regular fast passes. So to me, this kind of does not sound worth it at all.
Yeah. Can we please take a minute to look back over the ones at Hollywood Studios and remark on how awful they are?
I know, right?
It's like there's 3 rides at Hollywood Studios, and they have 2 different pre-selected FastPass bookings that don't include any of them.
So the weird thing to me is, like, if Disney wanted to make this worth it, and I hate to say this because we've talked before about how, like, upcharging isn't cool and all that, but if they really wanted to make it worth it, they should probably squeeze at least one in with an e-ticket attraction. And that's what kind of kills me.
It has to be.
But here's the thing. I don't think that the Magic Kingdom ones are awful. The Magic Kingdom ones, I would say, aren't half bad, considering, like, you know, maybe a family, you know, doesn't know how or doesn't want to take the time to book their fast passes and stuff like that. The Magic Kingdom ones are fairly, you know, common ones to fast pass. But
my problem is that a lot of these, you don't really need a fast pass.
that was exactly my next point, was that none of these need a fast pass. Like, I mean, yeah, some of the ones that they put in there are classic attractions, like the Dumbo Teacup Small World thing, or even, you know, Haunted Mansion and the Speedway, I guess. But, like, none of them need that because they're all such a short wait.
Mm-hmm.
I don't understand why the Speedway's not under pint-sized adventures and Pirates is futuristic and frightful fun, because I guess it would more so be the frightful category, but still, I think that Tomorrowland Speedway is like a futuristic category, doesn't really qualify.
Yeah, I don't know. It's just weird, and I think this targets a very specific demographic, and that's kind of what we have to look at. Like, it's a one-day ticket, which is weird, but it targets that family that doesn't go to Disney often.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking, is like, this is a good option for people who don't really know where to start or don't want to do a ton of planning.
I'm going to call it right now. By the end of this year, we're going to see park packages with the fast passes included. I'm going to call that right now.
I don't doubt that, but I'm still mad about it. But anyway, so moving on, we have a rumor this week, and the rumor is that recently filed construction permits are kind of indicating that a new hotel might be in the works in the Magic Kingdom resort area. So Disney filed a permit with the South Florida Water Management District for temporary stockpiling of earthwork. That's a quote, for a 30-acre site. So people, I guess, that know more about terminology than I do kind of have speculated this. But they, on the Walt Disney World News Today website, they've come up with a couple of different theories. One of which being a second DVC tower near Bay Lake Tower. The other one was going to be a volcano hotel, which would either be north of the TTC on the shores of the Seven Seas Lagoon or directly adjacent to Magic Kingdom behind Adventureland, which I think would be interesting. And then the third possibility would be something related to work at the River Country site. And I think there was one more. Oh, no, sorry. It said the site would be used for stockpiling of earthwork, which might be necessary for regrading the land before and after a hotel is built. So I guess that's the terminology that they interpreted. So, but I think this is kind of exciting.
Well, either way, something big's got to be coming for them to set aside 30 acres just to hold all the dirt and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So are you guys ready to dive into this week's topic?
Yeah.
Cool. So we decided it would be fun to do a best and worst list because those are always fun for us. The 3 topics that we had were best and worst animatronics, park details, and movie representations. Which one do you guys want to dive into first?
I don't have a preference.
We could just go in order then. We'll start with best and worst animatronics, because that was the first one we had on this list.
So do we want to go 3, 2, 1?
Let's do a round like we usually do.
Okay.
So I can start us off with my first one, which will be my number 3, I guess, the lower end of my best animatronics. Or do you guys want to start with worst?
Let's start with best on this one.
Okay, so I'll start with my third one, which will be the lower half of my list. And for number 3, I had Ursula from Under the Sea. Now, mind you, my list is going to be a little different because I still have yet to do anything in Pandora, and I know that there is something on your lists from there, even though I'm not seeing it. But I think Ursula is a really good animatronic because it's very large, very lifelike, and this is going to sound awful, but in comparison to most of the other animatronics in that attraction, I think she's definitely the best one. Now, to sideline that, I do have to put an honorable mention in for this one. But I'll throw that in at the end. I'll let you guys have this because I don't know if there is another one that on your list.
All right. Well, I guess I'll continue on. My number 3 is the Olaf animatronic in Frozen Ever After.
Oh,
That's my number 2.
that is my number 2 as well.
Nice.
So we're all in agreement, though, that it's a very, very good animatronic. You know, it sounds kind of cliche to say, but it really does bring the animated Olaf to life. Like, it mimics his movements extremely well, and you know, it really feels like they plucked Olaf out of Frozen and put him in a real 3-dimensional setting.
Yeah, I think it works really well with the projection mapping because he's, you know, cartoony. He's not a human character, whereas, you know, it was hard for me kind of to not put the other characters from Frozen Ever After on this list because I think that they're really well done, or as well done as they can be, but the projection mapping on them just is kind of like uncanny valley for me, but I think it works really well on Olaf, so they did really well on that part.
Is Olaf projection mapped?
His face is.
Oh, that's right. His face is.
Yeah.
For some reason, I thought that he was, like, just... I don't know, I'm remembering it weird, but I thought that he was just the actual, like, animatronic itself.
I have some honorable mentions, which we could talk about afterwards, but... because this one was kind of a hard pick for me, but I ended up going with Jack Sparrow in Pirates of the Caribbean, specifically the one at the very end where he's sitting in the chair singing. That is just seems super realistic to me, how it looks exactly like him in the movie, in my opinion, anyway.
Yeah, they did do a good job with that. I also think it really adds to the final scene. Like, the treasure room by itself didn't really, I don't know, draw your eye in, like, as much as it should, I think. And having him put in there, it really helps kind of make it a finale.
Yeah, for sure.
I totally agree with that. I think the one at the end is the best one. But I don't know. There's something about that one that's very lifelike. And I didn't put him on my list, but that's a good one.
Yeah, so lifelike that the one in Disneyland sometimes apparently sneaks in there and people think that it's an animatronic. So, good job, Disney.
So, Brian, do you want to do your number 2 now?
Sure, and I'm not sure if this is legal based on the rules of this game, but I am going to go with the A-Mode Yeti from Expedition Everest, even though it is no more.
I thought about putting this on my list, or at least in my honorable mentions, but I kind of had the same thought process as you, as like, maybe because it's not in A mode, it doesn't count.
Yeah, because if you have to compare,
I think if it was, it would definitely be on this list for me.
Yeah, because I mean, B mode Yeti, is it even really an animatronic? I mean, it doesn't move, so you know.
Yeah.
It's just a statue, I guess, at that point. But yeah,
It's okay. I had him as an honorable mention, and B mode Yeti was an honorable mention for the worst.
Oh, okay. I completely agree with that.
Nice.
So do we want to do number 1s now?
Sure.
My number one is a little out there, and I know that you guys are not going to agree with this. Well, being number one at least. But my number one animatronic is the Hopper animatronic, and it's tough to be a bug. And I think that that is the only redeeming quality of this attraction.
That one's in my honorable mentions for sure.
It's such a good animatronic, and it's got so many, like, intricate points to it, and it moves very fluidly. The only problem is, and we've discussed this on here before, it comes at the worst possible time, because there's just a million screaming children, and the attraction is not that good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It is sad that it's overlooked because of that. And, I mean, especially when you look at when it came out, just how technically impressive that was for the time.
Yeah, definitely. I still think this animatronic is pretty impressive considering how old it is, and I think that Disney has done animatronics more recently that are not as quality as this one.
Definitely.
Well, and that's the thing that Brian and I were talking about before we started the show. When we do our worst animatronics, all of mine are fairly recent. Because it's hard to say, an animatronic from, like, I don't know, a couple of years prior to, like, all this innovative animatronic stuff is bad because it's just dated. The thing about Hopper is, like, he was one of the first few really, like, super intricate ones. And if the A-Mode Yeti was still going, he would be up there on my list too. But I think that Hopper is probably my best substitute for A-Mode Yeti.
So I have a feeling that Brian and I have the same pick for number one.
I have a feeling we do too.
So I'll go ahead and say that it's going to be the Shaman of Songs from Navi River Journey.
It certainly is.
Because that is just the most incredible animatronic I've ever seen. It's just the motions are so fluid, and, like, it blows my mind every time I see it.
I remember when they came out with the video of the first test demo for it, and all I saw was that it was a video of something coming out at Pandora, and I clicked on it, and I saw it, and I wasn't impressed at all, because I was like, why are they making such a big deal about this person in costume, like, doing this thing? And I watched it 3 or 4 times before I went down to the comments and realized that it was an animatronic. It is that lifelike.
Yeah, I thought it was, like, computer animation. Like, I thought that they had just made, like, a little advertisement. And kind of, like, same thing as you, I was, at first, was kind of like, I mean, it's cool, but, like, why did they, like, bother with this, 15, 20-second clip of one of the, like, Na'vi just saying something on camera? Right. And then when I realized it was an animatronic, I was like, holy crap.
And, I mean, not even just how lifelike the details are in the face and the body and everything, but just the movements it's so incredibly fluid and lifelike. I would love to see, like, it without the skin on it, just to see how much mechanical going-ons are happening inside of it to make it move so fluidly.
Having not seen this animatronic in person, I do agree with everything that you're saying, but the thing that I really appreciate is that it's not in a position like the A-Mode Yeti, because if I remember correctly, isn't it on a platform that they can lower to actually do maintenance on? Like, thank God Disney learned their lesson.
Right. Like, they specifically were like, we're not making that mistake again.
So, do we want to move on to the worst now?
Sure.
Okay, my number one worst animatronic, and I have to say this again, because these animatronics are on this list does not mean that they're horrible, does not mean that they are bad by any means. But
mine are.
Well,
I was about to say, I'm completely disagreeing with Mario here on these.
Well, here's my thing, because I don't think that my animatronics are horrible. I don't think they're bad. I mean, I could have made a list of animatronics that needed to be updated, but I don't know, that just didn't seem fair to me. So my number 3 on this list, my lowest of the worst, or highest of the worst,
Best of the worst.
Yeah, that's the best way to put it. Is the Jack Sparrow animatronic in the barrel. I don't...
Where he's just, like, looking.
Yeah, I don't know. Something about that animatronic just doesn't do it for me. And out of the two in that attraction, I think that's the one that looks the least like him.
Yeah, I mean, I can agree with that one being the one that looks the, I guess, least realistic for sure. But the ones I picked for this are, like, real bad.
I mean, that was the thing. Like, I thought about it and I was like, I could do that. But I also, like, my problem is, and you'll see this with the next one, you'll see the trend in my next two. I always, like, whenever I think about things like this, I always think about where Disney was at technologically and what they could have done differently. So I'll let you guys go on with that, and then you can see my trend in the final two.
Well, my number 3 might seem kind of petty because it's like such a minor detail, I guess.
Well, if yours is petty, then my next two are just horrible, so...
So my number 3, I picked the hippo from It's a Small World.
That's my number 3 too.
Really? I was like, every time I go on this, that hippo's eyelids are broken and it looks like real whacked out.
I love that it has, I don't know what the opposite of a fan club, but its own like cult following of hate.
Right?
And it's been like that for so long. And I don't think you can use the excuse that, you know, oh, it's old and it looks dated at this point. It's like there is something very wrong with that hippo.
Right. It's like creepy. So then I guess since we had the same number 3, we can move on to number 2s.
Yeah.
So my number 2 and my number 1 are kind of interchangeable because of how I feel about this. And I know this is going to come to no surprise to anyone, but my number 2 is Anna and Elsa in Frozen Ever After. And the reason that I say that is because I think that projection mapping just does not work for me. And I've said that a couple times. But my biggest gripe with this is that while their heads are projection mapped, the rest of their bodies aren't. And there's just that weird separation to me. Mm-hmm. And it feels like, you know, Disney could have done better.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was saying earlier when we were talking about Olaf, is why that works for him, but does not work for them.
Right. And the shame of it is that the actual like animatronic portions of them are done very well, but you know, you have to kind of take it in its entirety. And yeah, with the projection map faces, it stands out very, very heavily.
And the thing about it is, I mean, I've said it before, I hate projection mapping, but I thought about it in terms of other projection mapping animatronics, and I'm just going to go out and say my number 1 because it ties right into this, but the Haunted Mansion Bride is my number 1.
That's a good one.
But between the two of them, there's one more projection mapping animatronic set that I honestly wouldn't consider that awful, and that's the Seven Dwarfs. For some reason, they work a little bit better than these two. For fairness sake, I wanted to not put them on this list because then it would just be me attacking projection mapping. Mm-hmm. But I don't know. Something about them works a little bit better because you don't see as much of their body as these two.
I think it might also have to do with the fact that Anna and Elsa are like these like petite feminine characters that are supposed to have like nice features, while the dwarfs are just kind of like lumpy old men. So I feel like it works better for them because they don't need as like they don't need to be as like elegant looking, I guess.
Right, and I think that you're right on that. It does work a little bit better because they're more cartoony. They're not supposed to be that. I don't know how else to explain it, but you did a good job on that. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and like plus the fact that, you know, Snow White being as old as it is and Frozen being as new as it is, we're used to seeing characters look a certain way. So just like kind of breaking that is unsettling, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's fair.
And you know, to touch on the Haunted Mansion Bride, I was very, very strongly considering putting it in in my list too, and the only thing that I couldn't decide between was whether or not I wanted to consider it an animatronic, you know? Because I mean, nothing really moves on here. It's all projection based. And what I hate about it so much is that, at least when you look at the Frozen ones or pretty much any of the other ones, the faces at least are contoured so that as you go around it, you still kind of get a three-dimensional look to the character. But the bride is just projected onto, like, you know,
a potato.
Exactly. You know, and it's one of those things that, one, you know, I don't really like stuff getting changed in the Haunted Mansion, but especially when it kind of detracts from that scene, you know, I would hope that, you know, they could just go in and kind of update it a little bit if they want to leave it in there, and at least, you know, add some contours to her face so that it looks better. But yeah, either way you slice it, it looks really bad.
Yeah, for sure.
One of the few parts of the Haunted Mansion I don't like.
Yeah.
I think we all agree on that.
And it's so hard to say because I love the ride so much.
Right.
But so my number 2, and I'll tell you beforehand why it's my number 2 and not my number 1, because it literally, like, it brings me some small joy, even though it's terrible in my opinion. And I've said this a million times, but I'm going to say, and I had to Google this because I don't know their names like you do, Brian, but I put Wendell from Country Bear Jamboree.
I can see where a lot of people would have that opinion.
And we'll have to, like, if anyone listening is not familiar with this character, just Google Wendell Country Bear Jamboree. You will have nightmares. It is truly horrifying.
He is by far the creepiest of the country bears, and as someone that loves Country Bear Jamboree, I'll still say yes, he's pretty creepy.
You know,
I will say that the walk-around character is infinitely more creepy, though.
Yeah, something about his face just, like, staying like that while the rest of his body's
like
moving.
Like gaping. Yeah.
It's a tad unsettling.
You know, it's funny, I don't know their names, like, I'm sure Brian does, but the fact that, like, you said that, and I immediately knew who you were talking about, just says a lot for that animatronic.
Oh, man. So, for my number 2, I think you could pick pretty much any animatronic out of this scene of the ride, but I'm going to go with the Ariel animatronic in the Under the Sea scene in Journey of the Little Mermaid.
That was
That's
an
a good
honorable
one.
mention for me and was very close to being my number 3.
I think it has to be the worst animatronic that is, like, the center point of that scene for as recently as this ride was made.
Yeah. I think the hair is the worst
The
part.
hair, the fact that you can see the, like, support thing coming out of her back.
I really thought you were going to say the fact that you can see the terror in her eyes. Because that's true, too. Like, every time I ride that ride, I see, like, she looks like she's in distress.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That whole scene has, like, some pretty bad ones.
And, you know, that's a shame because I really do think that Ursula animatronic is one of the best ones. So it's really weird to think about the fact that it has a really good animatronic like Ursula and then, like, a whole scene of really bad animatronics.
Right. Well, you know, I think the 2 Scuttle ones in there are very good, too. It's just...
That was an honorable mention for me.
It's just this scene. Like, if they would have put more work into this, I feel like this could be a very, very, like, highly regarded attraction. But the whole Under the Sea scene just really looks awful.
If I remember correctly, and I might be off on this, wasn't the original plan for that scene to be, like, blacklit? Or, like, darker than it actually is?
I believe so.
And even that would make this, like, this one section just infinitely better.
Yeah. I completely agree. I think we kind of touched on that in a previous episode, and Wasn't the ultimate thing is that kids were getting scared because it was too dark or something?
I feel like that might be right.
But yeah, I think that would do a lot for this attraction, but apparently they'd rather us see the support beams. So do we want to go for number 1?
Yeah.
Well, my number 1's already out there, so.
Oh yeah, that's right. Okay. Well, I want to preface this by saying this is not a political statement, and I have not seen it in person, but I truly think the Donald Trump animatronic is horrible in Hall of Presidents.
You mean the Ellen DeGeneres animatronic?
Wait, are y'all talking about the Hillary Clinton one?
Yeah. It's just like, if you go back and look at the other, presidents since they started having them do, part of the inauguration speech, none of them are amazing, but this one, it just blows my mind at how recent this is and how bad it turned out. It just, he really does look like they thought Hillary was gonna win, and we're already halfway done with her animatronic.
I don't know who it's supposed to look like, but it definitely doesn't look like Donald Trump.
Yeah, I would be super mad if I were him.
And that's the thing, this animatronic would be better if it looked like him.
Yeah, I mean, not to get political, I'm not a fan of Trump, but even if it was someone I was a fan of, if the animatronic was this bad, it would still be on my list. I just
Definitely.
can't even.
I went and saw this the last time I was at Magic Kingdom, and it was the first time I'd seen it since they swapped it over, and his face looks awful, but it's hilarious how spot on the hand movements are.
Oh, yeah?
They're so... You can tell they were, bordering on that line of, making it a caricature of him, but it's pretty good.
Yeah, well, at least they got part of it right.
So, Brian, what's your number 1?
Okay, my number 1, and this probably bugs me more than it should, but I can't help it, and it annoys the crap out of me. But it is the papyrus maker on Spaceship Earth. And this kills me, and I know I mentioned something a couple episodes back about the same type of thing happening in the Under the Sea scene on Journey of the Little Mermaid, but I hate when there's an audio animatronic and there is supposed to be somebody making contact with something, and there's a noise that comes with that, and the animatronic is nowhere close to contacting whatever he's supposed to be hitting. And the papyrus maker is supposed to be tapping the papyrus down on this table, and I mean, the little mallet or whatever it is that he has, it's like it's not even within 6 inches of hitting the table. And there's the super loud little tunk, tunk, tunk as he hits it. And I'm like, come on. You can either make him, come closer to hitting the thing and have it that loud, or you need to realize how off this is and, turn the volume down on that, because it just makes it more obvious that he's nowhere close to hitting the thing.
Yeah, that's funny that you put that, because I almost put an animatronic on my list for the same reason, but not this one. I was going to put the Teddy Roosevelt animatronic in the American Adventure, because when he's looking in the binoculars, they're 3 inches away from his face. And I'm like, there's no way you can see out of this, buddy.
And those are the kind of things that I think they deserve to be on this list, because it doesn't matter what period of time this was introduced. It has nothing to do with the fluidity of the movement or anything like that. All they needed to do was build the table 6 inches higher to achieve a good effect, but they didn't do it.
Yeah.
This almost made my list, but I could not remember the actual, name of the animatronic.
I don't know if that's what it's officially called, but...
But that was better than what I had. I honestly was I know where in Spaceship Earth this is, but I don't know what to call it.
Papyrus guy.
So, we didn't do honorable mentions. Are there any that you guys want to give a shout out to? I had a couple.
I had a couple for each. So, I don't know. I can go ahead and say one of mine for best was the Lumiere animatronic in Enchanted Tales with Belle.
That was one of mine too.
That's a great one.
I think that one's so awesome, and that's another good use of projection mapping, in my opinion.
That's a really good use of it, and the wardrobe as well. One of mine, and the only reason that this didn't make my list is because obviously this attraction's not here anymore, but the Wicked Witch in the Great Movie Ride was a really good animatronic as well.
That was my other honorable mention.
I loved that animatronic, and I'm so sad that it's gone.
Yeah, that was a really good one.
Honorable mention for worst animatronic is any other one that was on the Great Movie Ride.
Right? I have Ripley from the Great Movie Ride is on my honorable mention worst.
I think the Tarzan one had the worst in my opinion.
It was pretty bad.
My favorite is that like you could definitely see, one, the track, and two, the Tarzan animatronic before and after he swings.
It's like, here's Tarzan as he's rigidly turning around on the vine and swinging back in the other direction.
And look, if you're in the back of the cart, you can see Tarzan reload.
I had one additional honorable mention for the worst, and I put the Ellen animatronics in Ellen's Energy Adventure, because those to me don't even look like a woman, which I know that Ellen is not the most feminine person, but it literally just looks like a little boy, in my opinion. Or it did when it existed.
It really did. But also, honorable mention for the best, and I think this one gets easily overlooked by, one, how long this attraction is, and two, how boring this attraction is. But I really like the Mark Twain animatronic, and, see, I'm even drawing a blank. I can't remember who else is narrating this show, but the
Einstein?
Yeah, when they're climbing up the steps, and, like, there's just so many good animatronics in that whole thing, besides for Benjamin Franklin.
Well, yeah, it was Teddy Roosevelt, but even that animatronic is not bad. It's just that was kind of like a nitpicky thing, kind of like what Brian was saying, is that the binoculars were not close to his eyes at all. But the animatronic itself is not terrible.
Right, I think that one actually has some great animatronics, but...
I agree.
So do we want to move on to park details?
Yeah.
Do we want to do best or worst for this one first?
Let's start with the worst on this one.
Oh, I have some good ones. So
well, maybe you guys can inspire me, because I had a hard time figuring out things like details that I didn't enjoy.
I think Brian and I also said this before, that this is more going to be like gripes as well.
Yeah, let's just make this things you don't like about Disney World.
Okay, well,
most of mine aren't details, or what I would consider details.
my number, I guess the best of the worst, is a really cool detail that no one really, I don't know, it feels, I don't know how to explain this, because I like the detail itself, but I feel like it's something that, like, no one really cares about. Does that make sense? Like, okay, so my number 3, I guess, technically, is the Poop River in Liberty Square. I think it's a great detail, and I think that it was awesome that Disney went the extra mile, but I also think that it's one of those things that, like, no one besides us gives a crap about. And pun intended.
Fun, yeah.
But yeah, it is a weird thing to, you know, in a land that has so much historical accuracy, you kind of question whether or not they really needed to go that far.
Right, and that's the thing is, like, you know, it's not a bad detail, and plus this was kind of like something I threw in the last minute because I really had nothing else here, but I don't know, it feels weird to me.
Yeah, and I also think it's interesting because, like, when I did Keys to the Kingdom, that's where I learned about that specific detail. But they were talking early on into the tour about how the ground is so intentionally done because people aren't looking where they're walking, so it's done in a way that you see, like, you can see it out of your peripheral vision, so you don't trip on a curb, or you, like, you know, it changes gradually so that this, you know, theming changes, but it's not super in your face or obvious. So I think it's interesting that they made that kind of drastic decision of, hey, let's put this big brown river down the middle, when they put so much like intent in everything else as far as the ground.
So what was your number 3?
So I'll defend putting this into this category because I think that because Disney is working so hard to integrate it as part of the parks in themselves, I'm going to defend myself that way by throwing this in here. But I think the official park app is an absolute mess. Mm-hmm. It is near impossible to get to the things that I want to get to in it. The main thing that I want to do in the app is book fast passes, book ADRs, and look at my photo passes. And those should be the 3 most front and center things. And it seems like every time they update the app, it's getting harder and harder to get to those things.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's, when it's working, it's still not the most like user friendly, but that's when it's working. Like half the time I try to use it, it won't load at all.
Right.
And it just, you're right, it could be so much better.
Mm-hmm. And this is just kind of an aside, but one feature that I really wish they would add, and I know it's really only going to get utilized by big Disney fans and probably especially big Disney fans that live local, but a lot of times, especially if there's a new ride or something coming out, or just an e-ticket attraction that I don't get to go on a lot of times I want to book a FastPass for a ride and decide what day I'm going to do that. But I can't do that with the app now. I have to pick what days I'm going first and then pick what rides I want to do. And for certain stuff that I don't get to go on very often, like Flight of Passage or even like Seven Dwarfs, I don't get to do very often. Like, I would love to be able to go in there and say, hey, I want to do Seven Dwarfs. Show me what days there are available FastPasses on that.
That would be great. I always end up playing the game where I just go in between really quickly days.
Yeah.
Well, and off of that would work really well for ADRs too. Like,
right.
It would just make organizing your trip so much easier.
I know a lot of the things that they put in the app and kind of the way that they make it work, I think, is to kind of help control crowds and stuff like that. Like, for example, you can reload the app to show you different times that FastPasses are available, because they don't show you, even if you pick a certain day, like they're not going to show you all the hours that the FastPasses are actually available. If you reload it, different times will pop up. Secret planning tip. I guess not so secret planning tip for people. But, I know they're trying to do that so that, a lot of the really popular attractions don't get kind of like gang rushed, but it's still kind of annoying.
Yeah, but they could even set out like blocked windows of like, okay, you want to do Frozen Ever After, but there's a Fast Pass available at 1 o'clock, and then there's one at the next day at 2. Like, even if they just gave you blocks for specific days, like, that would be better than what's in the system now.
Well, like I said, I kind of had a hard time doing actual details, so I guess I'm going to stick with the theme that you guys are doing. And I just want to say that I think the cast members do an amazing job at pretty much everything that they do, but it really grinds my gears that they let people hold spots like 3 hours in advance. Just let me sit on this particular spot for 3 hours. And I feel like, I don't know, maybe that's just a personal gripe, because the one time I've seen Happily Ever After, I was smushed in between like a sweaty family and a lady on FaceTime. But
what a thing to be stuck between.
I know. I just think it would go.
I have to ask a question before. I'm sorry, I keep interrupting you.
Yeah, no.
But were they FaceTiming on an iPad? Because that'll make it so much worse.
No, luckily it was just an iPhone.
Okay.
But still, FaceTiming during a show drives me insane. It's like, no one is gonna be able to get a good experience from your little screen here. Like, whatever. But I don't know. I don't know what the best way to fix it would be. I just think it would be nice if they only allowed you to line up like a certain amount of time in advance or whatever.
To piggyback off of that, I wish that the cast members would be a little tougher about like enforcing the kind of stuff like that they're supposed to. Like one of the big ones that I hate is during parades and stuff when people are standing in walkways they're not supposed to be. The cast members will usually come by and say, "Hey, can you please, step out of there?" And then they kind of just walk off, and then inevitably the person just moves right back over as soon as the cast member walks away. Mm-hmm. And it's kind of, I guess, along the same lines of that. Like, if you need to set up where, people can't just post up in a spot somewhere super early when other people are trying to walk around there, and then they need to kind of stick to their guns and actually keep people from doing that.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And to piggyback off your piggyback, I thought of something else that kind of bugs me is like kind of the other side of that spectrum is when you're waiting for like, specifically the thing that comes to mind is when you're waiting to get into the theater for Finding Nemo the musical, it's got that huge walkway. Or Haunted Mansion, too. That's a good example. The cast member says, like, please fill in all available space.
Oh, yeah.
So people don't do that. So I go around them and get in front of them, and then they get really upset about it. And I'm like, well, this is what you're supposed to do. So maybe that's me being a jerk about it, but...
Oh, no, that definitely irks me, too.
I'm just like... people not listening to the cast members is like, this is only going to make it worse for you.
Right. So, my number 2, and this should really be no surprise. From here on out, my last 2 are totally details. But I have to attack my favorite thing to attack. I hate Chester and Hester's. And this really should not be a surprise to any of you. But it just... I know there's a theme, I know we've talked about it, but it just feels so... Disney needed a way to fill some space, and this was what they did kind of thing to me. I don't know.
All right, Brian, attack!
See, I do, like I said on this plenty of times, I do enjoy Chester's and Hester's, but I can't deny the fact that it does feel like Disney was filling this space. It does have a backstory, and I like the backstory, and I think it's kind of fun, but overall I can't defend that it doesn't fit very well into Animal Kingdom.
And the thing that kills me about this is, like, I said it feels like it's a filler, but for me, what really, really hurts this is that, like, there's so many other things that they could have done here. And even with Pixar releasing The Good Dinosaur, like, a couple of years ago, even though that was a flop, it's still, like, there's something that they could have done here.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. On a similar note, I really like Chester and Hester's and, the backstory and everything, but kind of like, I'm sure we've mentioned this on previous episodes, the theming just goes over people's heads. It's not obvious enough to where a lot of people get it.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that they could have, I don't know, interpreted
they could have tied it better.
Yeah.
Well, and the other thing that kind of kills me, and I think the reason that I understand the theming, but I think the reason that it hurts me so bad is up here we have Six Flags, and there's a section of Six Flags called the Boardwalk, and it is literally almost identical to Chester and Hester's. And that's, like, to me, it's just like, really, I can go get this at a Six Flags, which is the point, but still, with everything else around, it's like...
You got all kinds of Disney stuff up there with Dole Whips and Chester and Hester's.
Speaking of Dole Whips, I was at the Boardwalk the other day, and I was like, I should really get one, but it was closed.
Aww. Bummer.
But yeah, so who wants to go after that? And I will say, I'm surprised that you guys have not picked my number 1, and I'm curious to see if this pops up.
All right. Well, I'll step up since we're running on a theme of, like, beating a dead horse into, like, areas or rides that we've talked about not liking, because I'm doing this way worse than you for the, like, three-peat 3 week in a row just hating on Journey into Imagination. I can't stand the fact that the whole premise of this ride is supposed to be that we're going through a lab that goes into the workings of the five senses, and at the end of the ride they just go, oh yeah, those last two, we're not going to go to those, ride's over, get off. You know, it's like, it seems so, you know, half effort put into it. I'm going to try to not use a phrase I really want to use for it, but they I mean, but that's what it is. You can tell that someone was like, well, we're going to cut this ride short. You know, I know we talked last week about some of the reasons why the ride is shortened, but just to say, we're going to keep that same premise, though, that we're going to walk all these guests through all the five senses, and then we're just not going to do the last two. It just seems like a really, really cheap cop-out to me.
Yeah.
I do love that they have, like, an explanation for it, and how weak that explanation is. Like, oh yeah, you just got sprayed by a skunk. We're not going to go into the next rooms. Like...
Not the fact that somebody was like, okay, how would we ever get people to taste anything on a ride? Just, we didn't think about that. Let's cut the ride off here.
Right.
Well, you can go ahead with yours, Mario, because that's all I had for mine.
So my number one, and this really, really gets me, it's a detail, and it's also a thing that grinds my gears, but the Cars meet and greet in Hollywood Studios is so bad. It's literally just a statue of Cruz Ramirez with sound played over it. And the thing that really gets me about this is all they would have to do would be make his eyes move or something, because to me that's not a meet and greet, but Disney markets it as a meet and greet.
All right, I'm going to be 100% real with you. I did not even know this existed.
Me either. I was like, oh man, I haven't been to Hollywood Studios in almost 2 years.
It used to be Lightning McQueen, I think, but it's actually near Muppets Courtyard, I think. Honestly, I don't remember, but it's not good at all.
I think I've seen pictures, but I don't ever remember actually seeing it in the park. So maybe it's after my last trip.
It is actually by Pixar Place, which makes sense. Right by, I guess where Toy Story Land is going to be. Like at the very, very back of it. It's in a very weird spot, and probably rightfully so, because it is just that awful. And like I said, you know, make him an animatronic, make his eyes move or something, but don't just stick a Cars character and then put, like, sound over it and say, here's a meet and greet.
Is it, like, actually someone talking? Or is it recorded?
I want to say it's, like, recorded audio clips, too.
That's
Like, to make it
lame.
worse. I'm going to send you guys a video, and I'll put it in the show notes as well. It's, honestly, if it moved, it would probably have made my worst animatronics list, and I'm kind of regretting saying that all they needed to do was make it move.
Dang. While we were talking, I did think of one detail that I hate. And it's... Brian, did you say all of yours already?
I have one more.
Okay, you go first then.
All right. Well, this one I felt weird about whether or not I should put on here, but coming just from my opinion, I think it's one of my biggest gripes about Disney, and that is that Magic Kingdom is an absolute pain to get in and out of. Mm-hmm. And,
yeah.
You know, it's like for a first-time visitor, the process that you have to go through to get into Magic Kingdom is cool, and it's, you know, it's a really magical big part of the experience of going to Magic Kingdom for the first time. But as somebody that goes very often, and especially, you know, I go to the Magic Kingdom more than any of the other parks, it's very annoying having to go through the, you know, the parking gates to begin with, and they have alleviated a lot of it with the bypass now for the people that are going to the resorts. But to park, you know, fight the crowds to get into the parking lots, fight the crowds to get to either the ferry boat or the monorail, take the monorail over, and then have to do security and everything before I get in. You know, it's generally, by the time I get to the parking lot, another 45 minutes to an hour before I get in the park, which really kind of, I'm not going to say it kills the mood for me, because, you know, by the time I get in, I don't really care, but, you know, it does kind of take something out of it to have to go through that. As somebody that goes frequently, it's annoying.
Yeah, I would agree with that, especially because I don't stay on property. It's really annoying to have to park and, you know, like you said, take the transportation. Then you have to do, you know, wait in line to get in or whatever. Not that you really usually have to wait in line, but I completely agree with your sentiments on that.
Yeah, I totally agree with that as well. So what was your one that you just thought of, Beth?
So the reason I wanted Brian to go first is because this is related to, strangely, one of my favorite park details. And it's got to be the gas smell at Tomorrowland Speedway.
That's a good one. I didn't even think of that.
Yeah, that is just the most nauseating smell in my opinion. But I don't... You know, I don't know. Maybe if it was gone, I would miss it. Who knows? I doubt it. But it does tie into one of my favorite details, which is the intentional smells of Walt Disney World, such as the confectionery, rum burning, those kinds of things. I absolutely adore.
That's a really good one, and I didn't think of that, and I probably should have. But going right into park details, my number 3, so my lowest on the list, is all of the detail that goes into the Tree of Life, and that includes the trails through the Tree of Life. I think that's, like, to me, those little tiny, well, they're not even really that little, but the fact that you can walk around and look at all of them is just so, like, cool to me. And it really ties the whole theme of Animal Kingdom together.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's a good one.
I think I went, like, larger scale than you did.
Well, no, I mean, that's a really good detail. I had several things on my lists, and they're not really in any particular order, so that's kind of why I was willing to throw that one out there early on, even though that's probably my, you know, favorite, if not second favorite, general thing. You know, and there's a lot of science that goes into the fact that smell is such a strong sense, and it ties you to, like, certain memories and stuff. And I think it's really smart for them to have that, because it, you know, there's just, I've never smelled, other than being on Main Street, I've never smelled the confectionery anywhere else. Like, that's a memory that's, like, that smell is tied exclusively to that memory. So I think that's a really interesting kind of detail.
Yeah, definitely. What was your low end of that list, Brian?
So I have an oddly specific one, and I know you guys don't go to the water parks that much, so y'all might not have any idea what I'm talking about. There's this very cool little theming detail at Blizzard Beach, and it's near the entrance, near one of the gift shops, and it's one that you can very easily just walk past, but if you take the time to look, it's really cool. There's, like, snow on one of the roofs, and you can tell where, like, the ice skater has been skiing down it. And if you look across the walkway from it, you can see where the gator crashed into the building. But then if you look down at the concrete too, there's, like, it's the funniest looking thing. It's like footprints, but it's like where he was walking in skis, like, back across to get into the gift shop. And it's one of those little things that I love to notice or have someone point out to me at Disney, because it's just them going the extra mile and throwing in these, like, funny little minor things that they know that probably the majority of people are going to overlook, but the people that take the time to look into it, like, it adds another cool little experience to the parks.
Totally agree.
Yeah, I've never been to the water parks, but I've actually seen pictures of what you're talking about and thought that was a really cool detail. And I just also want to point out the fact that when you said ice gator, I thought you said ice skater, and I was like, what? And then I was like, oh, ice gator. That's clever. But side note, like I said, I've never been to the water parks, but I also have seen a picture that I really thought was a cool detail of the lifts, how they make you look like you're wearing skis.
Oh yeah.
Which I thought was really cool.
So, are we on to my next one?
I think so.
Okay, so this one was bounced between my best and my worst. Mostly because of location, but I think the Tangled bathrooms are incredibly well detailed, and I love how, like, straight out of the movie that section looks, but what kills me is the fact that it's just a bathroom.
Yeah, I still remember when they started putting that tower up, how excited I got.
I remember the same thing.
Until I found out it was a bathroom.
I remember sitting in one of the restaurants and, like, being able to see over the construction wall, and I was like, oh, that's so cool, I can see everything back there. And then, like, after they were like, oh, it's just a bathroom, I was like, no.
Like, man, you guys put more detail into this bathroom than you do a lot of actual attractions.
That's very true.
So I have so many on my list that I guess I'll just pick a random one, because most of them are just, other than my, like, number one, they're kind of all equal. But I don't know, you guys probably haven't, shame on me for assuming, but I'm going to assume that you guys have never had this happen, but getting pixie dusted.
I have not,
so
but I have had it happen to someone in my party, so I am familiar.
So I didn't know this was a thing until I was walking around, I think it was Castle Couture one time, and I was just, minding my own business, and a cast member was like, hey, how you doing? And I was like, good, how are you? She's like, good. And then she kind of looked at me, and she was like, do you want to get pixie dusted? And I was like, I don't know what it means, but yeah. And so for anybody listening who may not know, they have you close your eyes and make a wish, and then they wave their magic wand over you, and when you open your eyes, you have pixie dust, aka glitter, in your hair, and it's really fun, especially for a 20-something-year-old.
I do like that they do that just kind of, like, randomly.
Mm-hmm.
But they do kind of do it a lot near, like, Bippity Boppity Boutique and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
So it kind of makes sense.
Let's see, for my number 2, this is something that I kind of alluded to way back. I think this was one of our first episodes. This might have been, like, episode number 2 or 3, maybe. So if you're an OG Station 71 listener, I guess I'll finally pay off the secret. And if you don't want to know, then skip ahead a little bit. But I mentioned that if you look while you're in the Tower of Terror queue, that there is a sign on one of the walls before you go into the pre-show rooms that has where some of the missing letters have fallen off. And if you take it's one of those things, like, you would have to put so much work into to figure this out, but it's so cool that they throw a detail like this in. There's missing letters on this sign, and if you were to write all of them down, it spells out an evil hotel, and it's just like, nobody would probably ever catch that on their own, but the kind of, I forget where I heard about this, but it was really cool. And the next time I went on Tower of Terror, I had to look at it, and sure enough, it was there. And it's just like, how, one, who comes up with these things, and two, like, to implement them like that, even though people won't notice it, like, it's just very cool.
Yeah, that is a cool one.
Yeah.
Talk about listener payoff. That was our second episode.
Was it number 2? I thought it was.
That was
back
number
then.
2.
Wow.
Because it was our second episode was our Hollywood Studios.
Oh yeah. You're right.
Show. Because that was when they started closing things. But my number 1 kind of ties into my number 2. And this is, I really wanted to put Hidden Mickeys here, but that just seemed too stereotypical. So I went a different route. I went Hidden Pascals.
Oh yeah.
I really like that little detail because, one, that's so, like, in character for him, and it's so true to, like, that idea. And the fact that they went that extra mile to just hide him places is so cool to me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I completely agree. I briefly thought of the kind of the same thing where I was like thinking about hidden Mickeys and then I thought about hidden Pascals, but then I was like, I got one detail that's really minor that I think is cooler than all the rest.
Oh boy, what is it?
So hopefully you guys have heard about this, but the ring outside of the Haunted Mansion.
Yes.
Yes.
So I just think that that's such a cool story because it's like basically fan created. So anybody that's not that doesn't know that's listening, there used to be, it was like a fence, like leftover from like a Q pole that was in the stone in front of Haunted Mansion that looked kind of like a wedding ring. And so this lore started building around it and people started like making up stories and speculating like, oh, this was the ring of the wife, blah, blah, blah. And like, there's a couple of different stories. If if you're interested, go check them out. But basically what happened was they decided to remove it one day and there was such fan outrage that they actually put a real ring into the pavement. So I just thought that was like a really cool kind of, I don't know, show of how powerful fan outcry can be.
That is very cool.
I love that Disney just rolled with it too.
Mm-hmm.
So what is your number one, Brian?
My number one is another one that we've mentioned on here before, but I just love it. I think it's an awesome little detail. It's the sagging shutters in Liberty Square. And for those that haven't heard this, I'll go real quickly, but it's during the Revolutionary War, the main material that was used to make the hinges of shutters was metal, until there was a huge metal shortage for ammunition during the Revolutionary War, so towns were basically taking apart everything around them to try to scrap the metal to make bullets out of. Well, a big thing that they would do is they would take the metal from the hinges, melt them down into bullets, and they would replace them with leather ones. Well, after time and sitting out in the rain and stuff, a lot of times the leather would stretch out and the shutters would start sagging. Well, this was a detail that the Imagineers actually just put in to Liberty Square, and a lot of the shutters are crooked like that. And it's kind of cool because, one, it's this little detail that, again, that they didn't have to put in there, but even more than that, there's like a little history lesson behind it too, which I think is just super appropriate for being in Liberty Square.
Yeah, definitely. I love those details where they actually teach you something.
Yeah, I agree. So, this last category, I feel like this is going to be super easy to go through in a very quick manner.
Yeah.
We had best and worst movie representation. Do we want to do best first or worst first?
Let's do best.
Okay. So my number 3 goes along with everything I just said, but I think Tangle is very well represented in the park, but also very poorly represented in the park. So this could have been on my best or my worst list, but because of how good that section looks and how, like, that's exactly how I would have pictured it, I had to stick this on the best.
Yeah, my number 3, just out of the sheer volume of, I guess, representation in the parks, I put Cinderella because Cinderella Castle is like, not only is it the icon of Magic Kingdom, it's the icon of Walt Disney World, like in general. Plus, Cinderella's Royal Table and Bippity Boppity Boutique, and you have the meet and greets and the carousel, and I just feel like, everywhere you look, you can find Cinderella, so I think she's pretty well represented.
That was, like, it almost beat Tangled for it, but then I was like, that's too cliche.
Yeah.
What about you, Brian?
All right, well, again, I feel like I'm messing up when I'm putting stuff in these categories because I kind of went the opposite way and looked at a ride first and thought about how it represented movies, and all mine are kind of weird in that sense now that I'm looking at this. But for my number 3, I put PhilharMagic just because I think that the music in Disney songs is a huge part of what makes them so great. And I think PhilharMagic did a really, really great job of keeping all of the original music and then just updating the rest of the attraction around it to kind of showcase some new animation techniques. But that the like pureness of the Disney music that is, you know, the centralized theme of this whole song or this whole attraction was just done so well and so like to the originals.
Yeah, that's a really good like out of the box answer. I wouldn't have thought of that.
I actually very much agree with that, and I would have never thought of that. So my number 2 is a little odd, but I think that what's become of the area, not only on the attraction but around the attraction, does a really good job of subtly representing the movie. I have to go with Pirates of the Caribbean, even though it's weird because this is one that the movie is based on the attraction, but then afterwards the whole area around the attraction became based on the movie.
Right.
That's a good one too.
Mm-hmm.
For my number 2, my kind of interpretation swayed back and forth between kind of like best as in like most accurate representation and best as in most represented. So I put Frozen for my number 2, similar for the reason that I put Cinderella, is just because it's just frozen, frozen, frozen everywhere you look. So sure, I don't need to tell anybody that, but that was my number 2 pick.
All right. My number 2 is another weird one, but I went with Muppet Vision 3D because I think that it is just a perfect representation of the Muppets. And I'm a huge Muppet fan, and I think that this attraction just does it to a T. And I love that they've kept the original movie all these years. I know that's kind of a weird one, but...
No, that's a good one.
Honestly, so weird point about this. I think if Muppet Vision ever closes, Disney needs to release the video on like a 3D format.
Oh, definitely.
It would not do nearly as well as the attraction does, but just for like Muppet historical sake alone.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that'd be cool.
On a very sad side note, I went to Hollywood Studios the last time I went to Disney, and seeing
that is really sad.
Seeing where the entrance to Galaxy's Edge is and where Star Tours is, I don't think Muppet Vision's going to be around much longer. It is
really.
It is. I didn't realize this. You know, when I looked at the pictures and even the maps, I don't know. It didn't really drive the point home, but like Muppet Vision is sandwiched in between Star Tours and the entrance to Galaxy's Edge. I don't see how they could possibly... Like, it doesn't make sense to be like, all right, you're in Star Wars. Okay, now you're in the Muppets, and now you're back in Star Wars. So
here's what they're going to do. Calling it now. Disney's going to update Muppet Vision, but it's going to be a retelling of the Star Wars movies through the Muppets' eyes.
Holy crap.
That would be awesome.
Would be the best way that they could do that. Everybody will be happy, I think, if they do that.
They would never do it, but that would be the perfect thing to do. Because 1, you would update Muppet Vision, and 2, it would tie into Star Wars land.
Yeah, I actually was listening to the Disney Dish a few days ago, and they were kind of not talking about Muppet Vision in the sense, but talking about the fact that they've heard from their sources that you're not going to be able to buy Galaxy's Edge merchandise inside of Galaxy's Edge, so that they're going to keep they're going to have like Tatooine traders stay there and be like the hub to buy actual like Star Wars merchandise, because they were saying you wouldn't see Han Solo walking around in a Star Wars t-shirt, so it wouldn't make sense for them to sell it inside of the land, which I agree with, but that's, I guess, my small hope for Muppet Vision is that maybe they're going to keep that barrier for that reason.
It's a very interesting point. I didn't think of that.
Let's hope.
So, my number one that I'm surprised no one picked, because I honestly think that this is the best representation that they could have done, is Beauty and the Beast. I think that dropping that giant chunk of, like, basically straight from the movie into New Fantasyland was the best thing that they could have done.
This was my number one, too. And I kind of, like I was saying, I was kind of fluctuating between most represented being as in best and, like, best as in most accurate. So this was one where I went with most accurate because, like, first time I walked in to be our guest and I looked in that ballroom, I was like, oh my god, this is like I'm inside the movie right now. Like, this is incredible. And not just that, but Enchanted Tales with Belle, while it's not, like, I guess canon per se, I think that that's a really, like, overlooked fun little attraction, and the magic mirror is just magical, literally.
Well, and even to your point about, largest and best movie representation, like accurate, screen accurate, this is a huge chunk of land too, so it is pretty sizable.
Yeah, for sure.
What's yours, Brian?
So my number one, again, continuing on this weird theme, it's the best representation for a non-Disney IP, but I have to say that I think Flight of Passage represents Avatar better than any other single ride represents a movie at Disney.
I would agree with that.
And it's weird, though, because it's not a Disney IP, but I think that the amount of work that was put into it, and you're representing kind of like the biggest part, or I'm not necessarily the biggest part, but like the most climactic moment of Avatar in this ride, and I think they just do a fantastic job at it.
I honestly, I have to tell you guys this. I've watched Avatar twice in the last, like, week, and I thought of you guys both times, but even more did I realize how subtle they went with Pandora. Like, in comparison to what they probably could have done, but I'm totally okay with that.
Yeah, and, I think the reasoning behind that is also kind of what they're doing with Galaxy's Edge, is, like, not making it, like, a specific time frame, I guess, in that universe.
Yeah.
So that they can be flexible with it. They don't have to be stuck.
Right.
So, but I think that that's really cool, and I do agree with you, Brian, that that's a really good representation of Avatar. But on a similar note, it may very well be a Disney IP soon, right? Because of the Fox deal.
Well, good point.
So
That is very true.
I don't know what all's included, but I would assume that is.
I would assume it is too. So do we want to move on to the worst, because we're pushing it on time?
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay, so my number one, or my number three worst, out of all of the attractions on here, I think this is the most represented of the worst, but it gets it in the worst way. I have to put Lilo and Stitch as my number 3 worst.
Same.
I feel like this is all going to be very similar, maybe not up until the end.
Well, I put The Princess and the Frog for my number 3.
That was my number 2.
Most of that is probably based on personal bias, because that's my favorite Disney film, and I think that it should be much more represented in the parks. But the reason that it was my number 3 instead of my number 2 or number 1 is because at least they added the section in Mickey's Royal Friendship Fair that's pretty heavily focused on Princess and the Frog, which is cool.
That's true, and that's kind of why Lilo and Stitch fell on my number 1, because, at one point we had Stitch's Great Escape, and we have a meet and greet, which is pretty similarly tied with where Princess and the Frog is at, except now they have better uses of their representation, I guess. I don't know. So that was my number 2, and that will bring us back around to Brian and Beth for number 2.
So my number 2 is like going to be really out there, I think, but and I understand why it's not represented in the parks, but I feel like that there could be a lot of opportunities for Treasure Planet to have a place.
That almost made my list.
I know that it was a flop. I don't understand why, but I know it was a flop, and that's why it's not represented in the parks. But I think that it's an amazing movie, and it deserves more representation.
There was at one point a Jim Hawkins meet and greet.
Really?
Yeah, it's very weird looking. He's got... I'll send you a picture.
It's like a face character, right?
It's a face character.
Okay, I was like, please tell me they didn't do like a hood or whatever, a head.
It's... The wig and the pants are a lot bigger than they should be. I'm going to say that.
Huh.
There's also a Ben meet and greet, too, from the same movie, which is kind of cool. But
I feel like that one could work.
But they were both, like, around when the movie first came out, so...
Yeah,
That makes sense. But that made my honorable mentions.
I have a very closely related number 2 with a movie that it kind of...
Oh no, if you pick my number 1.
It kind of feels like Disney just forgot about or tried to have everyone forget about, and that's Atlantis.
Okay, that was not my number 1, but I totally agree with that.
Yeah, that one, I considered putting that one on the list, too.
You know, and especially, I'm trying to think of the timeline of this, but, because I don't know, I can't remember exactly when Atlantis came out, but that would have been a pretty easy thing to shoehorn into 20,000 Leagues.
That's a really good point.
Or even not there. It's like, you know, it was a animated movie that had a ton of action elements in it. Like, there's a lot of exciting possibilities for a ride that you could have come out with.
Yeah, and like kind of along the same lines, what I was thinking with Treasure Planet is how they could have easily worked that into Tomorrowland.
Oh, yeah.
But as usual, we have better ideas than Disney.
I think the thing about these movies, and even my next one, and I hate to say this, but the problem that these movies really had was that Disney wasn't doing as good as it did after the big, renaissance of Disney movies, and I think that really hurt it a lot.
Yeah.
But my number 1, and this is really sad because this is one of my favorite Disney movies, and I think it's just so poorly represented where it should be really easy to represent, is Hercules.
Same. Oh, wow. That's my number 1.
The only representation it ever gets is that occasionally, and very, very rarely, will you ever see Meg on Fantasmic.
Wow, I didn't realize that was an occasional thing.
Yeah, I mean, it might be a little more than I realize, but, it's very occasional from what I've seen. And apparently there is a costume for Hercules, like he is a face character, but they don't ever bring him out. And I feel like this would be super easy for them to incorporate into, like, almost anywhere. But
especially Epcot.
Right. Side note, there was a parade, a Zero to Hero victory parade in Hollywood Studios back in 1997, and that was pretty much it. But that got replaced, so... So
I just Googled back in the day, apparently they had a Hercules and Megara meet and greet.
Is it the one with Phil? Because I just found a picture with Phil.
I saw that one too, but I just want to point out the fact that these dudes are pretty buff. Like, good for them for, like, legit actually hiring people instead of doing the, the muscle padding or whatever, which I guess would be hard to do with Hercules since, his outfit's sleeveless, but...
Right.
Because that's what they do with Gaston, right?
Yeah. I want to say yes.
Well,
padded muscles.
On that note, I went and watched the Beauty and the Beast live on stage the last time I was there. And I gotta give it to you, that Gaston, that dude was jacked. Like,
really?
I thought that too. I was like, it is kind of good that when they want to do something that's like supposed to be realistic and live on stage, that they don't do the like puffy padded thing. It's kind of ridiculous because it looks so cartoonish.
Mm-hmm.
Also, side note, I would pay any amount of money to get a meet and greet with Hades. This costume looks pretty awful, but I would still do it.
I want to say that he used to be in one of the stage shows at Not So Scary.
I think he was. I want to say he was until fairly recently, but still.
You know, I think if... I don't know how Hercules slipped my mind, because I think I would probably agree with that more than the number one that I put down. But my number one was Aladdin. And I know, you know, I kind of hate to say it because, you know, we talked about this and this sparked what was still to this day probably my favorite episode that we've done on the Magic Carpets of Aladdin, you know, that tied into everything else in that episode. But I just, growing up, this was definitely one of my favorite movies. And, it, you know, I think it was extremely popular. And it kind of feels like with the only thing that I can really think of offhand that we get is the Magic Carpets ride and then A Whole New World in PhilharMagic. And for as big as a movie this was, I just feel like it doesn't get anywhere close to the love it deserves in the park.
I would agree with you as far as worst representation goes, also because of the meet and greets and how they changed Jasmine's costume.
Oh, yeah.
Because I feel like that's bad representation. I understand why they did it, but still bugs me.
I totally agree. So, that said, is there anything that you guys want to throw in here before we tie this week up? Because we're pushing an hour and a half. But yeah, I mean, I'm pretty much good if you guys are good.
Yeah.
I do want to know, because someone put this in here, but I do want to throw this question out. Do any of our listeners agree and or disagree with our lists? I really would like to know, because I feel like a lot of these were subjective, at least until the very end. We were pretty much like, there was almost no overlap. So I'm curious to see what everyone else thinks, and if there's something that you think we missed. Then that's going to do it for us this week. Thanks for joining us again on another episode of the Station 71 podcast. If you like what you heard, be sure to subscribe to us on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts from, and leave us a review there while you're at it. If you want to get in touch with us, you can find us on Facebook.com/Station71pod. You can find us on Twitter at Station71pod, Instagram at Station71podcast, and you can send us an email to station71podcast@gmail.com. We hope you enjoyed your ride, and we'll see you real soon.
Please stand clear of the doors. Por favor, manténganse alejado de las puertas.